Yeah, we know, Tony. Look, if you've clicked on this video, you already know who Iron Man is. Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, and the guy who made us all cry in Endgame. But how did Tony Stark go from reckless rich kid to the most important Avenger in the MCU? It all started with one very bad day in the desert. Instead of dying, Tony did what Tony does best. He built something cool and made everyone else look stupid. What followed was years of suit upgrades, epic fights, and sarcastic one-liners, all leading to one of the biggest sacrifices in superhero history. Now, before we dive in, I gotta say, this channel is brand new, and I've got one goal: hitting 1,000 subs before Tony builds his next Iron Man suit. So, if you love Marvel, hit that subscribe button. Alright, suit up, because this is the brutal story of Iron Man. Before he was Iron Man, Tony Stark was just a billionaire genius who thought life was one big afterparty. He was the golden boy of Stark Industries, making weapons, making money, and making headlines for all the wrong reasons. One day, while showing off his fancy new weapons in Afghanistan, or Vietnam in the comics, depending on how old school you are, Tony's convoy was attacked. He got hit by his own missile, ironic, right? And was captured by a terrorist group called the Ten Rings. Instead of getting a nice hotel room, he got a cave, kidnapped by terrorists who demand he build them weapons. And just to make sure he didn't run, they let him know that the shrapnel in his chest is slowly moving toward his heart. Enter Yinsen, the kind-hearted doctor who saved Tony's life and basically became his first true friend. The Ten Rings demanded that Tony build them a weapon. Tony, being Tony, said, "Sure," but secretly built the first Iron Man suit instead. And just like that, the legend was born. Tony blasted his way out, but Yinsen didn't make it, giving Tony his first big wake-up call. Once he got home, Tony pulled the ultimate CEO power move and announced that Stark Industries was done making weapons. His business partners loved that. Just kidding, they hated it. Especially Obadiah Stane, his dad's old friend, who was definitely not up to anything shady. From that moment on, Tony dedicated himself to improving his armor and becoming a real hero. The days of reckless billionaire Tony were over. Kind of. With a new purpose and a shiny metal suit, Iron Man was officially born. Now that Tony Stark was officially Iron Man, you'd think things would start looking up for him, right? Wrong. Instead, the universe decided to throw every possible life-threatening situation his way, because apparently being a billionaire superhero isn't stressful enough. First up, the betrayal. Remember how Tony's announcement about quitting the weapons business didn't exactly get a round of applause? That's because Obadiah Stane, his dad's old business partner, was too busy plotting behind his back like a true corporate villain. Turns out Stane had been secretly selling weapons to terrorists for years. Oh, and he also stole Tony's arc reactor, paralyzing him in his own house. Yeah, Stane went full supervillain, but Tony, being the absolute legend he is, crawled his way to his backup arc reactor and jumped into his Iron Man suit for the final showdown. What followed was a brutal rooftop brawl between Iron Man and the Ironmonger, a giant mech suit powered by stolen Stark tech. Let's just say Obadiah did not win that fight. He ended up fried, and Tony barely made it out alive. But hey, at least he got to close the chapter on his first backstabbing business partner. Then came the Mandarin. Or Trevor? Yeah, that whole situation was a roller coaster. In the comics, the Mandarin is Iron Man's greatest villain, wielding 10 alien-powered rings that give him god-tier abilities. This dude was basically Iron Man's arch-nemesis. But in Iron Man 3, Marvel was like, what if we turned the Mandarin into an actor? Enter Trevor Slattery, the guy who was pretending to be the world's most terrifying terrorist, but was actually just some British dude who got paid in beer. Tony was not amused, and neither were a lot of fans, but the real mastermind was Aldrich Killian, the guy behind the Extremis virus, which basically turned people into lava-breathing super soldiers who could punch through Iron Man suits like they were tinfoil. Tony went up against an army of these guys, blew up all his suits, and still barely survived. And then, to top it off, he removed the arc reactor from his chest, meaning he no longer needed it to live. Finally, one less thing trying to kill him. But if you thought that was wild, let's talk about the Extremis storyline from the comics, because in that version, things got even crazier. Tony didn't just fight people using the virus, he actually injected it into himself to survive. That's right, he merged with his armor, essentially becoming a part machine, part human hybrid. This gave him insane healing abilities, telepathic control over his suits, and super speed thinking. But the side effects? Horrifying. Tony almost lost his mind, suffered intense hallucinations, and struggled with whether he was even human anymore. Just another day in the life of Tony Stark. And then there was Doctor Doom. Most of Tony's enemies are evil businessmen, terrorists, or rogue AI. But then there's Doom, A guy who's basically what would happen if a medieval sorcerer and a sci-fi overlord had a baby. At one point, Doom actually steals Iron Man's armor, forcing Tony to fight a supervillain who now has access to all his technology. And let's just say, that fight did not go well. Tony barely made it out alive, and the only thing bigger than Doom's magic attacks was his massive ego. Tony Stark might be a genius, but his biggest genius move? Surviving all this. And guess what? Things are only going to get worse. For all the battles Tony fought in the suit, his biggest enemy was always himself. And let's be real, when you've been kidnapped, nearly blown up, and betrayed by your closest business partner, it's only a matter of time before things start to break down. First, there was the drinking. Yeah, demon in a bottle. The storyline where Tony's real weakness wasn't some giant mech suit or an alien overlord, it was a bottle of whiskey. After losing control of his company, constantly being attacked, and feeling like the weight of the world was on his shoulders, Tony spiraled into full-blown alcoholism. He started missing fights, screwing up missions, and even lost control of his Iron Man suit. And if that wasn't bad enough, Rhodey had to take over as War Machine because Tony was too much of a mess to even wear the suit. That's how bad it got. Speaking of losing control, let's talk about the arc reactor poisoning. Yeah, it turns out shoving a mini nuclear reactor into your chest is not doctor recommended. The palladium core that was keeping Tony alive? Yeah, it was also killing him. Every day his blood toxicity levels shot up and there was no cure. So what did Tony do? He went full YOLO mode, started partying harder, acting reckless, and even peed in his suit at a party. MCU fans, you know the scene. Meanwhile, Justin Hammer, aka Walmart Tony Stark, was out there trying to replace Iron Man by giving Whiplash an army of drones. But Tony, half drunk and dying, still managed to suit up, blow up an entire fleet of robots, and survive a giant electric whip-wielding maniac. Because at the end of the day, he's still Iron Man. And then there was the worst betrayal of them all. Remember the Ten Rings? The terrorist group that kidnapped Tony in the first place? Well, turns out they weren't just some random terrorists. The real Mandarin, the one from the comics, was out there the whole time, secretly pulling strings. And in the Iron Man, director of S.H.I.E.L.D. comics, he infects Tony with a technovirus that literally turns his body against him. So now his own brain is shutting down. His memories are getting wiped, he can't control his body, and he's losing the ability to be Iron Man. And what's his solution? Oh, just erase his entire brain and reboot himself like a broken iPhone. Yeah, Tony Factory reset his own mind just to survive. And in true Tony fashion, he didn't even back up his files. At this point, the dude had been betrayed, poisoned, beaten, brainwashed, and rebooted like a freaking operating system. And just when you think it can't get any worse, Thanos shows up. When the Mad Titan showed up looking like a purple California raisin on steroids, Tony barely had time to process it before getting launched into the worst fight of his life. It all started in Infinity War when Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, and half the Guardians of the Galaxy teamed up with Tony on Titan to stop Thanos. And let's be honest, they were doing great until they weren't. They almost got the gauntlet off his hand, but then Star-Lord, in peak I'm gonna ruin everything mode, lost his temper and punched Thanos awake. Tony then had to fight one-on-one against a guy who could slap the Hulk like a ragdoll. And, oh man, this fight was personal. Tony threw everything he had at Thanos, repulsors, nanotech blades, missiles, even a last-minute anime power-up where he turned his suit into a giant sword. And how did Thanos respond? By stabbing Tony straight through the stomach, like full-on impalement. This was the moment we all thought, oh no, they're really about to kill Iron Man. But nope, Thanos, out of respect, decided to let him live. You know things are bad when the supervillain feels bad for you, and then came the snap. Thanos snapped half the universe out of existence, and Tony was left stranded in space with Nebula, slowly dying in a busted spaceship. Just when it seemed like this was the end for him, Captain Marvel swooped in last minute for a cosmic Uber ride back to Earth. Fast forward 5 years, and Tony had done something no one ever expected. He walked away from being Iron Man. He got married to Pepper, had a daughter, I love you 3000, cue the tears, and was finally living a peaceful life. But of course, the universe wasn't about to let Tony actually be happy. The Avengers came knocking with a plan to time travel, undo the snap, and bring everyone back.
I don't want to lose Tiny here in the 1950s. Excuse me?
And Tony? At first he said no. He had finally escaped the pain, the battles, the constant near-death experiences. But deep down, he knew. He was Iron Man. So he built one last suit. The time heist happened, past Thanos figured out what was going on, and suddenly it was an all-out war. The Avengers, Wakanda, Doctor Strange's wizard army, every hero ever, all against Thanos and his army in the biggest battle Marvel had ever pulled off. And then it happened. the moment that cemented Tony Stark as the greatest hero in the MCU. Thanos had the gauntlet. He was seconds away from wiping out the universe. But Tony, using the slickest sleight of hand in history, stole the Infinity Stones right out of his grasp. And just like that, with a snap of his own fingers, Tony Stark saved everyone. But it came at a price. Tony wasn't built to handle the power of the Infinity Stones. The energy ripped through his body, and for the first time ever, there was no way out. There was no last-minute upgrade, no backup plan, no clever trick. He just sat there, half burned away, as his friends gathered around him. Peter Parker, his kid protege, begging him to stay awake. Pepper holding back tears, telling him, "You can rest now." And just like that, Iron Man was gone. The man who started it all, the guy who built a suit in a cave, the one who survived everything the world threw at him, he gave it all up to save everyone else. His funeral wasn't just for the characters in the movie, it was for us. For over a decade, Tony Stark was the heart of the MCU. And when his arc reactor floated on the lake, glowing with the words "proof that Tony Stark has a heart," we all knew this was the end of an era. Tony Stark may be gone, but his legacy? That's never dying. He built the Avengers, inspired the next generation, and saved the universe with one snap. Spider-Man, War Machine, Rescue, his influence lives on in every hero who came after him. But more than that, Tony proved that being a hero isn't about power. It's about sacrifice. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. But when the world needed him most, he gave it everything. And that's why, no matter what happens next, he will always be Iron Man. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Tony Stark's brutal journey, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's get this channel to 1,000 subs. Because unlike Tony, I don't have a billion-dollar company funding this. See you in the next one.